Eligibility. The first eligibility criteria is the nationality of the investor. Only investors from the treaty countries are eligible to apply for the visa. Once treaty eligibility is established, the investor must satisfy several more criteria. Let's give an analysis of these criteria. First, how much money do you need to invest? The regulations do not specify an exact investment amount required for the E-2 visa. However, there are many clues to help determine a safe amount. The first clue being that the investment must be substantial. To determine whether an investment is substantial, the consular officer will perform a proportionality test. The test is an evaluation of the following two figures: amount of investment versus cost of buying or creating an established business. Here's an example to illustrate. Giorgio from Italy is applying for an E-2 visa to open a brand new coffee shop in Hollywood. He has invested $150,000. Scenario number 1. With his application, he submits evidence that an existing coffee shop in the neighborhood sold for $150,000 last year. In this case, Giorgio has proven that his investment is 100% proportional to the cost of buying an existing coffee shop. Scenario 2. This time, Giorgio submits his application showing that he has invested $150,000, but he does not have evidence of another coffee shop selling at that price. Instead, he gets a letter from the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce showing that the average cost for starting a coffee shop in Hollywood is $125,000. He also provides a letter from a local coffee shop explaining that their startup costs were only $100,000. Here, Giorgio has also likely proven that his investment is proportional. An important note here is that the more expensive a business, the less proportional the investment has to be. For example, a consulting firm can become operational and successful with an upfront investment as low as $60,000. However, a large manufacturing facility requires a much larger investment to operate due to the cost of lease, equipment, employees, etc. Therefore, if the proposed business is a consulting firm, it is highly advisable that the investor commits the entire amount prior to application. However, if the proposed business is one that typically requires substantial infrastructure, investors may satisfy the officer with a smaller fraction of the investment amount. Furthermore, the amount of the investment must be sufficient to show the investor's commitment to the success of the business. If the consular officer believes that the investor is worth $100 million, it is unlikely that a $60,000 investment will convince the officer of his or her commitment. On the other hand, for the average investor worth $300,000, a sum of $100,000 will likely be considered large enough to prove commitment to the success of the business. When does the money have to be invested? The proposed business must be very close to being operational at a time of filing the E-2 petition. This means that the consular officer would like to see that the funds and assets have been irrevocably committed to the enterprise. A business that merely exists on paper with speculative or idle investment does not qualify. Investments do not yet have to be deployed in their entirety, but investors should be prepared to document how a significant portion of funds has already been spent and how they intend to spend the rest. Here are some general rules for normal expenditures. Rent. Investors cannot count the entire value of the lease, but only count the duration paid prior to filing. Investors who have not yet taken possession of the space can count 1 month of rent. New goods or equipment. Investors can count the full value of all equipment that is purchased for the business. Existing goods or equipment. Investors can count the total amount of previously purchased equipment, so long as they can prove that the equipment will be used for business purposes. Other expenses. Expenses for marketing, branding, web design, and so on, can be used in their full values towards the E-2 investment. Proper documentation must be submitted to prove these expenses. It should be noted here that many E-2 investors wish to purchase existing businesses, but also wish to protect themselves from massive loss in the event that the application is denied. In these cases, the regulations allow for the investor to enter an escrow agreement, where release of the purchase funds is contingent on approval of the E-2 petition. How to prove the investment? Though not as stringent as the EB-5 process, the E-2 also requires the investor to prove the source of the investment funds. There are two parts to proving the source of funds to the consular officer. First, the investor must show the possession and control of the invested funds. This requirement can be satisfied by providing documentation showing how the money was acquired. The regulations allow money derived from income, gift, or inheritance. Funds derived from a loan are only eligible if the investor is personally liable for the loan. Second, the applicant must prove that the investment came from lawful sources. For example, if the funds were earned through the sale of real estate, applicants may have to show proof of the sale and proof of how the funds were earned to purchase the real estate in the first place. Which documents are required? Different consulates may have slightly differing criteria, but applicants will likely be required to provide a variety of documents, including lease and purchase agreements, bank statements, receipts, and purchase orders, wage history, documentation of gifts or real estate sale, and business plans. In our following video, we will discuss application processes.